I agree with Abdullah that it's going to be a New Zealand South Africa semi-final. Hello and welcome to the Papare.com, where we are previewing the semi-finals of the Rugby World Cup. Yes, the Rugby World Cup. What an outstanding weekend of rugby we had last weekend, where we looked at the 4 quarterfinals. And to join me in looking back at those 4 games and looking forward to the next 2 games, my good friend and co-commentator Abdullah Yusuf joins us in the studio. Of course, Black Knight bringing you the Rugby World Cup experience and the male grooming experience from head to toe. Hello, Abdullah.
Hi, Shanika.
Good to have you on the show.
Thanks.
And it's been an outstanding weekend of rugby, hasn't it? I don't think in my life, and we've watched a fair bit of rugby, you and I together, I don't think it's ever been this intense in just 2 days.
Absolutely. Brilliant 4 games, especially the 2 games between Ireland and New Zealand, as well as France and South Africa, which I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about. But just the entertainment, the intensity of the games, it was absolutely brilliant.
Let's talk about one semi-finalist. We can't ignore them, although everybody is trying to. But Argentina beat Wales. Wales went into a lead in that game. They were quite comfortable. 17-12, they were leading at about the hour mark. And then suddenly Argentina remembered they had to play rugby. And they came back into that game, ended up winning it quite comfortably, 29 points to 17. What do you make of this Argentina side, Abdel?
Well, in comparison to their first game against England, where they were pretty abysmal, to be fairly honest, they have gradually been improving. They've had some tough games against Japan, against Samoa, and they've steadily been building. And I think in these kind of tournaments, you've just got to peak at the correct time as well, isn't it? Just in time for those knockouts. And that's exactly what Argentina did. And I also feel, as you said, Wales did go into a lead, but generally these quarterfinal knockout games are won in those last 20 minutes or so, isn't it? And that's where I guess Argentina's experience came in. You could see Nicolas Sanchez coming into play, that wonderful read, interception, try, and just his composure overall coming off the bench. Just those little things, those experience. I think that's probably what made the difference against a rather inexperienced Wales team, you have to say. They left quite a few experienced players back, like Alvin Jones, Justin Tipuric. So maybe that probably came to haunt them. But I feel it's just that experience of Argentina that probably swung the game in their way.
Interesting you use that word, Abdullah, because the last try, I mean, Wales were probably still in it with a shout in the last few moments of the game. But Sanchez coming on, and it was Sam Costello, who just come on for his first game, Dan Biggar going off injured. Not his first game, but his first real World Cup game of consequence. And he throws the intercept pass. And what does that do to a young player? But also, what does that tell you about coaching? And do you go for the youth policy like Eddie Jones did, or do you have a blend, or do you just go for experience in these big games? What do you have to do?
Yes, it was a bit of a surprising substitution. I'm just not sure whether Dan Biggar was injured, because generally the replacement fly half is Anscombe, and he was out as well. So I don't know how much of game time this young lad had. So just to come in that kind of pressure situation was asking a lot, and it was a huge gamble. And that just didn't pay off at the end of the day. So just probably an error of judgment in terms of substitutions. But coming back to how we'll handle it, I guess it's just a matter of how he's handled as well, isn't it? I still remember those so many years ago, Matt Gitu coming off the bench, and he was just thumped on his back by Johnny Wilkinson. But he managed to put that behind him and had a brilliant career. So, I mean, it's just, you just got to put this behind you and move on. And I'm sure the Wales setup will probably manage him through in the future.
Putting it behind you and moving on, there's an incident that we have to talk about much later on that we will do. Abdul, I'll come back to that. But let's move days just a little bit. We'll talk about the 2 big quarterfinals second. But let's look at the Fiji versus England quarterfinal as well. A really entertaining game. Fiji ended up losing that one 30 points to 24, just within a score, of course, and they were going for that score towards the last few moments of the game when that controversial penalty and performance, I would have to say, by Matthew Renal came back to haunt Fiji. But is it enough for Fiji to go back home, Abdullah, saying, oh, we've made everybody proud, we performed more than we expected to? But I would think as a Fiji fan, you probably should have made the semi-finals, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they had the players, they had the experience. You had that lovely blend coming in for players playing, having played for the Drua, as well as the players who are playing in the Northern Hemisphere. You just felt that all those players just seemed to be at a similar level. While in the previous World Cups, there was that divide between the professional players and just those local Fijian players as well. So I'm sure they will be disappointed. You could see by the reactions to those calls and those tight moments that they were expecting to make it to the semi-final, having beaten England in the warm-up games as well. So I think they would definitely be disappointed.
Yeah, they certainly have to be. And I think there's a little bit too much being written about these. I don't remember when we used to talk about the West Indians and even the Sri Lankans when we were playing that calypso kind of cricket that people used to say. And I think we need to move on from there and realize that Samoa and Fiji and Japan are actual legitimate top 10, top 15 rugby teams. And we can't be talking about them in these terms of, oh, they provided us with so much flair and entertainment.
True, but I think to be fair by the players, I don't think they looked at it that way as well. I think they expected to go there and qualify, and they were obviously bitterly disappointed that they fell short.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, brings me to the next question though. You would expect that from the players, and you saw that against Wales, you saw that against Australia, very professional performances. But then they just fell away a little bit against Georgia and Portugal. We talked about this last week with Sudarshana, where the island mentality sometimes, Abdullah, is to do just enough. Was that something that you saw in this lead up? Because they really picked themselves up for the last quarter of that game.
Yeah, that's right. So that's, as you said, the professionalism coming into it, but also that collective professionalism. I don't think they're probably looking at a few individuals here and there. And as you said, there was definitely a drop in intensity. But at the same time, you don't know what kind of training program they were having in leading up to the knockout game, because sometimes teams tend to load their players with a high load and then just taper off before the knockouts. So it could very well be that as well. I don't think that had too much of a part to play, but I just think that you have to constantly come into these knockout games and play, isn't it? And that's where England probably have that history, have that pedigree of having played in knockout matches. They're what you call a World Cup beast, isn't it? They could have a terrible lead up to it, but they could just come and turn it off, and they've done it in the previous editions as well. So I think it's probably more that. But I definitely think Fiji and to a certain extent Samoa and Tonga in the future World Cups, with having a professional setup back home, we could look forward to them actually competing and giving the top tier nations a real run for their money in the future.
Well, hopefully Sansa will take note and maybe do a lot of funding for these clubs, because they take their best talent, isn't it? So it's imperative that they give back. And I think the Drua is largely thanks to the Australian free trade embassy, and they've been actually funding a lot of money into the Drua. So it shows that they are interested in making the island rugby come up a little bit. But let's talk a bit about England, probably everybody's most hated team as well, Bella, but they managed to win that game. They managed to win a tight game against Argentina with one man down. They managed to scrap through Samoa also and win that game. True, maybe they have got the rub of the green there as well. But the fact is, here they are in the semi-final, one game away from their fourth final.
Yes, and the word is used, they find a way, isn't it? Find a way to win those important games, those important moments. And I don't think you can actually blame them. You'd have to say they've done really well. Just looking at their lead up, it was horrendous. And even before that, with the change of coaches and everything that followed, you'd have to give them a lot of credit for the fact that they have actually made it to the semi-finals. It was actually, as you said, everyone's most hated team, versus everyone's most loved team. So you can understand the reactions, isn't it? But end of the day, they're in another semi-final, and we'll probably discuss a bit more as we go along. You never know in the semi-finals what could come up.
Yeah, well, England have been to the final in 2003. They made the second successive final in 2007. They've been to the final in 2019. And who knows, maybe this might be their fourth final. But let's move on to the other quarterfinal, of course, that big quarterfinal between Ireland and New Zealand. Everyone was expecting, I certainly was expecting, Ireland to go through. Despite being an All Blacks fan, I really didn't think that the All Blacks had what it took, skill-wise, to actually beat this Ireland team. But it turned out to be a fairly, even though it was close and that last passage of play was really intense, Abdullah, it looked like the All Blacks were always going to win that one.
Yes, the fact that they never trailed in the game says a lot about their game management as a whole, isn't it? But you just sense that they really targeted this game, the way they went about it. Uh, they were just so determined. They lost the series to Ireland at home. That was probably at the back of their minds. And just sense that they probably wanted it just that little bit more. And the other side of it, just looking at Ireland's build-up into that quarterfinal, they had tough games against Scotland as well as South Africa, which they did well to win. But even in the the games against the lesser teams, Andy Farrell was pretty adamant on playing his best set of players without rotating. So that was a bit of an interesting way of approaching it. And you'd probably sense that in the final 10 to 15 minutes, they just seemed out of their legs, isn't it? We're talking about 37 phases in that final move. But Ireland was just going like in slow motion, you just felt, isn't it? They were not in full flow. So you just have to question the fact that whether they had probably, I wouldn't say peak, but whether the efforts in those previous rounds finally took their toll in the knockouts. On the contrary, the All Blacks, they definitely rotated their players throughout that league stage. They probably played their best teams probably in just a couple of games against Italy and in the first match against France. So they just looked slightly fresher as well. And those little things probably proved crucial in the final analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you because we're looking at the statistics and the Ireland starters had an average of about 320 minutes, meaning they had played 4 full games, whereas New Zealand starters had about 200 minutes, which is just over 3 games. Or 2 games at a bit. So it showed clearly that there was a lot of planning that had gone into this, but Andy Farrell maybe overestimated how much his players had in the tank. And what really got to me was at the time when they were leading 36-0 against Scotland, I think maybe in the 65th minute or so, suddenly they just fell off a cliff and Scotland scored twice, 2 big counter-attacking tries, and Ireland were out on their feet even in that game, even though they had led 36-0. So I think fatigue was a huge factor in that game, but as you said, Abdullah, both games that were kind of upsets with South Africa and All Blacks both won, they really seemed to want it, didn't they? The All Blacks came out of the blocks firing, just like they did against South Africa at Mount Smart. And there was something in their bellies, that fire in their bellies that you can't quantify. You can sit back and analyze the numbers till they're blue in the face, but there is this intangible thing that you can't really talk about.
Yes, and you sense that that pent up feeling that they just wanted to come and put it all out there on the ground. That was there with them. There was also probably a lot of pressure on Ireland as well, isn't it? The All Blacks were in an unusual position of having been written off before the games, and you probably felt that just suited them because they were pretty much going under the radar throughout the league phase. And come the knockouts, they just lifted their performance and they find themselves in a semi-final with a great opportunity to go all the way.
Yeah, Johnny Sexton, overrated?
No, I don't think so. Pretty harsh, really. I think he's done brilliantly well for Ireland. Just going on social media and seeing some of the reactions with the Ireland supporters, they were obviously all disappointed, but some were rating him as the greatest Irish rugby player of all time. So I don't think this kind of result would tarnish, but wouldn't impede his legacy. I think he's contributed so much for Ireland, and he'll definitely go on and be recognized as one of Ireland's greatest.
Won lots of Grand Slams for Ireland and 6 Nations titles as well. And what a player he was. Won European Championships as well. So we've seen the end of a sterling career for Johnny Sexton. But I'm sure we'll be seeing more of him probably in the coaching box when his own mate, Ronan O'Gara, comes probably to take over from Andy Farrell. But let's look at what was, I think, in fairness, the match of the weekend. South Africa taking on France. I got that one wrong as well. I thought France were going to win this one comfortably because South Africa had to do so much work to get into this quarterfinal. But what a game, Abdullah. Probably up there with the top 3 games of rugby I've ever seen.
Absolutely. And I think we're very fortunate to witness 2 such games in a couple of days, isn't it? Brilliant game, again, the intensity. South Africa, real back to the wall stuff, isn't it? Against with the crowd all in favor of France. They just absolutely they just went back into their knockout mode of rugby, isn't it? Kicking high balls, two tries from up and unders, chase, tap back. France surprisingly did not cope with that. I'm sure they would have expected that South Africa will employ those kind of tactics. But again, just the spectacle, the intensity of the game, it was absolutely brilliant.
It was almost karmic, wasn't it, Abdullah? Looking at what France has done to teams like the All Blacks in the past, you thought that when they were not favorites, they come out and just do this one smash and grab, pickpocket a result, and then go home. And this is exactly what happened to them this time, because they were overwhelming favorites. They were the number one team in the world, best player in the world, and South Africa, without quite a few injuries, new players coming into the team just without any match practice. And suddenly it happened to France and they couldn't deal with it, because you would expect a team of that quality to be able to handle up and unders, because it wasn't something that was unexpected.
Exactly.
And at the same time, they seemed to, in even the other try they conceded, they were passing the ball along the floor, and then Peter Steff just picked it up and sent it down the line for Jesse Kriel's grubber. And it seemed that they were trying too hard and trying to earn this tag of favorites and hold on to it. What do you think happened in the dressing room?
I don't think anything happened in the dressing room. I think it's just, again, the mental makeup, isn't it? South Africa is a team that has been there and done that. France, probably for the first time in a very long time, were expected to go all the way. And just handling those expectations, you just have to question whether that probably got the better of them. And also, it's a relatively young French team at the end of the day, compared to what the South Africans have to offer. And at the end of the day, we've got to remember that it was just a 1 point difference. That block conversion, who knows where Ramos was kicking. So just those little things could go away. And eventually, it's just between the years, isn't it? And that's where probably South Africa won it. They just knew when to turn it on, when to play the percentage game, when to run the ball. Just comes with experience. So I just feel that France, it's a young team. Guys like Dupont, when Intermac comes back, Jalobert, Ramos, they're all pretty young, isn't it? They've all come from that 2020 World Cup winning under-19 team. So I'm sure that they will be better next time around, and probably you feel it was one World Cup too early for them. So I'm sure that they will learn from this. They've gone through this adversity, and I'm sure they'll come back better 4 years down the road, because you sense that most of these players will be there next time around, unlike Ireland.
Speaking of coming back from adversity, that Cheslin Colby charge down, Abdullah, I've never seen it before at an international game. 20, maybe 25, 6 meters out, and he covered that in 2.5 seconds or something. But my interest was in Ramos's reaction. He had it charged down, he wasn't even surprised, he just stood for a second and then turned and went back. There was no protest, there was no please check whether he was on the line. And I don't think Thomas Ramos ever really recovered from that, because he missed a penalty that was well within his range, and then he kicked that 22 dropout in the late stages of the game. He kicked that out on the full. I don't think he recovered from that.
Yeah, you could say so, because it stunned him as well, Shanik. I also noticed his reaction. He just stood there for a second, not quite knowing what happened. It can definitely have an impact on you, but you just got to put it behind you. The missed penalty kick, you could argue that it was probably because of that. You remember Johnny Sexton missing a relative sitter in the All Blacks game as well. So these things happen in knockout rugby. You just got to deal with it, and that comes only through experience. But the interesting, I would give South Africa credit as well. They probably identified Ramos's kicking style and probably knew he takes a bit of a step through. I read somewhere as well that since Colby plays in the French league,
they played together for 6 years.
Exactly. So he probably has that bit of IP with him as well. So he used that on this occasion. But yes, these are all experiences which sometimes you have to go through that will make you better next time around.
And Dupont, of course, we saw his injury kind of overshadowing all the media in the lead up to this game. Do you think he maybe tried to do a little bit too much in the game?
I thought he was quite good. I thought he picked the correct choices. There was again that wonderful pass which created that try. I thought he did his part. You sense that probably he was not really trying to go into contact too often, which was understandable. But I think he did reasonably well. But I think the South African players also around the fringes were just keeping a hawk
Targeting
eye
him,
on him
yeah.
as well. So he was not allowed to do too much. But overall, I think he had a relatively decent game, and you saw pictures of him after that game,
Yeah.
pretty despondent as well. But again, he's a young lad, still in his mid-20s.
26, I think.
Yeah, so he'll have another World Cup in him, and dare I say, he'll be much a better player 4 years on.
Hopefully, he'll have a couple more World Cups in him. Let's look at the semi-finals, of course. Those are the ones coming up, and everyone's excited for them. England taking on South Africa and Argentina taking on the All Blacks. Black Knight bringing you the male grooming experience from head to toe. Welcome back to the Papare.com. You're watching the preview of the semi-finals of the Rugby World Cup, brought to you by Black Knight, the male grooming experience from head to toe. Abdullah, huge games coming up, huge. But of course, everyone's predicting an All Blacks versus South Africa final. But Argentina and England stand in the way. Argentina versus the All Blacks. It's a game that is heavily tilted historically in favor of New Zealand. But Argentina have won recently, have not really been tested too much in this World Cup. They're fresh. What do you think is going to happen?
Yes, I think for me the key is what kind of mental space the All Blacks will be in. Is that after playing such a high intensity game that was hyped so much, what will be the emotional state? Physically, I think they have so much solid recovery processes, they'll be okay. But emotionally, how do the build up to that game against Ireland, will they be able to come down to that? If they just are able to manage that, I just can't see All Blacks having too much of problems against the Argies. But again, the Argentina, if they just turn up, you just never know, isn't it?
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's hard to see to look beyond New Zealand to make the final.
Samuel Whitelock back in the starting 15. Mark Telea also makes his way back after that disciplinary breach. And of course, Argentina are looking to guys like Nicolas Sanchez, Kremer, Boffelli to do the business for them. But that's where the experience has come into the picture. That's what we've been talking about. But this Argentina team, very experienced, aren't they?
Yeah, very experienced. They know how to handle the pressure. And I think most importantly, they know that they now can beat the All Blacks. They have broken that glass ceiling,
yeah.
as it was, isn't it? So they have beaten them on neutral territory, and they've beaten them in New Zealand as well. So that fear factor is probably out of the way. It's just that how well they will execute on the day. And with the Argentinians, it can go either way, isn't it? So All Blacks will have to be on guard. They'll have to control the pace of the game. I think that's going to be crucial. If they can do that, then I think the All Blacks should be okay.
We've seen it happen before. England last time around, 2019, peaked in that semi-final against the All Blacks and then didn't have anywhere to go from there in the final against South Africa, where they were thoroughly beaten. Hopefully that doesn't happen to the All Blacks today, where they've expended so much energy in the quarterfinal that they don't know what to do today. How many are the All Blacks going to win by, Abdullah?
I say All Blacks by 8.
All Blacks by 8, okay. So let's see where that goes. So let's talk about the other semi-final also quickly. And we have that one. It's going to be a massive game. South Africa taking on England. It's not the first time they've met in World Cups. They've met several times before. Last time probably in the final, everyone will remember that in 2019. And they've had a final before in 2007 as well. Both of them fairly forgettable games though, Abdullah, you have to say. But this one looks like it might have some memorable moments.
Yes, I think it'll all depend on how South Africa approach the game, isn't it? With playing Libbok at fly half, they just seem to get the three quarters running a bit more. So I think man-to-man in the pack, you'd probably say England will be able to match them to a certain extent. But the key difference will be in the backs. If they can get some quality balls, and if they get Williamson and Libbok running, and Leolande and Creel getting over the gain line, getting them front foot ball, then it's going to be pretty hard for England. England know how to pick themselves for these games, isn't it? I think this game could be much closer than the other semi-final, which we discussed, purely for the fact that England just know how to approach these games, what needs to be done. They've been in a World Cup final before as well. So it'll be a close game, I feel, but it's hard to go beyond South Africa,
Yes.
isn't it?
Owen Farrell rather, in the side. Some people suggest that perhaps George Ford should be there ahead of him. Do you think that is having an impact on this England team and how they play?
Well, I don't think so. I think within the group, he's very well respected. Probably outside the story is different. I think that's why everyone is just reading too much into it. But I just think just listening to the pundits and all the analysts just talking about it, I think within that setup, he has a lot of respect amongst the teams, and probably he tends to control things much better as well. So that experiment of having Ford and Farrell just didn't seem to work at the 10-12 combination. So that's why he's been brought in. And I think it was probably the correct call as well. I don't think having both them in the setup quite helped, because there are two players calling the shots then, and there seemed to be a bit of confusion. So I think overall it's the correct call. He was the designated leader at the start of the World Cup. So I think that's why they want to finish with him as well.
So South Africa by how many?
I think this will be much closer. I get South Africa by 5.
South Africa by 5. Okay, so we've called it there. I agree with Abdullah that it's going to be a New Zealand-South Africa semi-final. But then I got 50% of my calls wrong last week. So let's see what next week brings. Thanks very much for joining us on this preview. Thanks, Abdullah, for being on the show. And we'll see you for the finals.
Black Knight, make your mark.